Christians we're called to be holy, which means set apart, which means peculiar or odd. If we're not odd, then what are we? Because we're supposed to be set apart. Yeah, that might be the uh-oh part for me too. But there's something to be said. Every time that Jesus talks to someone, okay, so we kind of just went from, at the start he said, you have not left the faith. That's a compliment. And now we just got through like that middle part where he says, oh, but you got to change some of this stuff. Now we're going to the last and final part. Okay. And the last and final word of God is always going to be love. It's always going to be grace. It's always going to be mercy. Okay? Always. And so here we have a promise, and that's a wonderful thing. If you look, we're going to read verse 17, and it's actually a whole paragraph right there. But it goes, whoever has ears, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Which is another way of saying anybody can read this. Even people 2,000 years later. It goes on. To the one who is victorious, I will give some of the hidden manna. God's got a hidden feast somewhere for us. That sounds exciting. But then the next part. I will also give that person who is victorious a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. And in the book of Revelation, somebody is victorious because it says, I don't remember what chapter, but it literally is because they held on to the testimony of the Lamb. That's a phrase that's used in the book of Revelation. Somebody is victorious not because of what they do or have not done, but because they hold on to the testimony of the Lamb. Okay? Or another way of saying this, you guys will enjoy an eternity with God where you can enjoy Him forever. Not because of what you've done, and not because of what you've not done, but because of the testimony of what the Lamb has done for you. That is very important. Because that means we are all on even ground with people who are morally better and people who are morally worse than us. But it goes on. And this is my favorite part, to be honest, of the entire thing. So this is great. Listen. This is definitely the cool part. And he goes, I will give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. Okay. These little white stones are incredibly popular, especially in the town of Pergamum, or the city, because the city was known for having, it sounds strange, but white rocks. Okay. So one of their exports would actually be stone carvings, and some of them would just be these little rocks. Okay. People used to, back in the day, instead of having a jury like we do now, okay, people would sit there, and let's say at the front door we would have two buckets, okay? And so I might say my part of a defense, if this was like a courtroom, and then somebody else might give the defense, and you guys would listen to all of it, and all of you would either have a black stone or a white stone. And on the way out, you would either drop a black stone or a white stone in one of the buckets. And then at the end, when everybody had dropped their stuff off, they would count up how many stones there were, and whichever had the majority won. So let's say up there was a bucket, and everybody dropped a black stone in it. That means you all found me guilty of some crime. Or if you all put white stones, that means you found me innocent. Okay. Here's Jesus saying He's going to give you a white stone. Not because you deserve it, but because that's an act of His grace to say to you, you're innocent, even if you're not. But then there's a second reason. People used to hand out these white stones because let's say there was, right across the hall, a giant ice cream social. I wish there was because it's really hot. Okay. But sometimes they would give people, here's a white stone, this is your entrance ticket. Because it was kind of difficult to make little paper tabs back in the day. Okay? So you just have a little stone and it would be marked and it would say, okay, you're allowed to come in. Here's Jesus saying He's going to give you a white stone that gives you entrance. To where? A place where there's going to be a giant feast. Again, not because of what you've done or not done, but because of his grace and his love that he wants to invite you to a party that you don't deserve. And then, finally, it says, I will also give that person a white stone with a new name written on it, known only to the one who receives it. Do any of you know the character of Abraham in the Old Testament? Hopefully you do. Okay. Do any of you know what his name was before God spoke to him? Yes.
Abram.
Abram. Great job. Seriously, I'm not being sarcastic. That was great. Abram was his name. And so when God all of a sudden speaks to him and gives him a promise, his name changes. We have here Jesus saying he's going to give you a white stone. That 1 says you're innocent, 2 says that you're invited to a great party, and 3 is going to give you a new name because there's a promise that he will always love you. This little white stone is not just like some little flippant thing. Like this carries weight. And I think that is a beautiful promise. Okay. And listen, if for most of this little chat right now that we've had, you felt like most of it was the uh-ohs, take hold of that little white stone in your head. I wish I brought a bunch of little white ones, but I couldn't find any. And lay hold of that. Be like, listen, God, you've promised me that I'm going to be innocent and that I'm invited to a giant party and that you're going to give me a new name. And I have one last thing to say. Just nod your head if you've ever felt like you were wronged. Nod your head if you have ever felt like somebody wrongfully called you a name. Whether it be a jerk or there's plenty of obscenities out there. Many of us, I remember I used to wear glasses. Now I wear contacts because, well, actually I'm more active than I used to be, so glasses are kind of hard. Sometimes we when somebody says our names, or somebody calls us a name. In my instance, people used to say, John, you're a nerd. You're a nerd, 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 nerd. And then I let that name start to define me. Chances are we have all had somebody, or even groups of people, that called us names, and we let that name become our identity. Does that sound familiar? I think that's almost like a universal thing we all deal with. I find the book of Revelation, yes, there are some parts that are about persecution, but there are also some other parts that are about the end of days, the last days, the eschaton, whatever you'd like to call it. But it's great to think about on the last day, God is going to call us by our right name. Regardless of what all the terrible things people have called you, Jesus is going to call you by the name that most perfectly describes you. I'm going to guess that name is beloved. I'm going to guess that name is child of God. In the end, what I'm going to say, and it kind of resounds what I said before, our identity should be named by God. Not by the relationships we're in, not by the jobs that we take, not really by anything else. So, in your mind's eye, grab that white rock and hold on to it, because that is a promise that God's going to give you a new name. And that's how every one of us should finish thinking about God. With a moment of, whew, because God is for you, not against you. Always.